Hey everybody, my name is Doug DeFrank, and in this video we're going to talk about how to create a UEFI-enabled virtual machine in VMware Fusion. Now, in VMware Fusion 8.5 and earlier, this process was a little more cumbersome. You had to go into the VMX file and make a setting change, and it was a little more complex for the end user to actually achieve this goal. However, in VMware Fusion 10 and newer, they made it much easier to do. As a matter of fact, when you build a new virtual machine, it's right there in the GUI asking you if you want BIOS or UEFI. So in this video, we're going to talk about how to do that based on your particular version of VMware Fusion, so stay tuned. Okay, so as we mentioned, let's go ahead and create a UEFI-enabled virtual machine here in VMware Fusion. And as you can see in this particular case on this computer, I'm running VMware Fusion 8.5. So to create a UEFI-enabled virtual machine is a little more complex. But let's go ahead and create a new virtual machine, create a custom virtual machine as I usually do. Again, I like to control the settings and setup of a virtual machine, so I do custom. In this case, we're going to do Windows Server 2012. Standard 60 gig disk is fine. Normally I would change the memory and some of the networking bits, but for this particular case it's not really important. So I'm going to go ahead and click Finish and pick a location. This is fine. Now it's actually created the virtual machine and it's trying to power on. As you can see here, that looks like a traditional BIOS. So now what it's going to do is obviously try to go through the PXE boot, look for an ISO, which is not mounted. So before I install an OS, before I do anything next, I want to go ahead and actually shut this down, and I actually want to quit VMware Fusion because I need to edit a VMX file. Okay, so as you can see here, we have the Windows Server 2012 VM that we just created. I'm going to go ahead and right-click on that and say Show Package Contents. And inside here you can see we have a bunch of VMDKs and the NVRAM and VMX file that make up this particular virtual machine. But this one right here is the file we're interested in. I need to right click on that and I'm going to open, you can either open it with TextEdit, or in my case I use this software product, Text Wrangler. It's one of my favorites for basic text editor. And it opens up the VMX file here for tweaking. Now you can see here, like for instance, the virtual hardware version is version 12. And so what I'm actually going to do is I need to add a line. And since we have that selected, let's go ahead and add a new line right here. And we're just going to type in the words firmware equals quote EFI end quote. And save it. If Fusion was still running, there's a chance that this file would not save correctly. Powering down the VM, in my experience, powering down the VM is not enough. You actually need to completely quit Fusion altogether in order to make this change and have it stick. So now that the VMX file is changed, let's go ahead and close that. We'll just close this Finder window while we're at it. So now that we've saved that VMX file, let's go ahead down here and launch our VMware Fusion software. Now, when I power on this Server 2012 virtual machine that we just created, we'll see now, it's no longer the traditional BIOS-based screen. It is indeed the UEFI boot firmware screen. And again, as before, it's trying to either boot from PXE on the network or boot from an ISO. But this is really what we want to see before we install any operating system onto this or into this virtual machine rather. This is the screen we want to see. And there you have it. That's how to create a UEFI virtual machine in Fusion 8.5 or earlier. Okay, so now that we've seen how to create a UEFI-enabled virtual machine in Fusion 8.5 and earlier, let's take a look at how to create the same type of virtual machine in Fusion 10. And I'm sure you'll see it's much simpler, but still, let's go ahead and start that process. So let's go ahead and launch Fusion. As you can see here, we are running Fusion Professional version 10. And again, let's go ahead and go through the steps. Let's create a new custom virtual machine, just like we did before, Windows Server 2012. And oh, look right there. When you build the VM, it's asking you right there, do you want BIOS or UEFI? And yes, you even have the option for UEFI Secure Boot. Not the topic of this particular video, but still, it's right there. It's in the GUI. Continue. Same 60 gig hard drive, same specs. Sure, have at it. Let's go ahead and save that virtual machine. Once this VM fires up, you'll see that it came configured. Boom, right there it is. It's got the EFI boot firmware configured right in the GUI. I did not have to quit Fusion and jump in to a text editor, tweak the VMX file, save my changes, quit the text editor, jump back into Fusion, and to see that I've got UEFI boot firmware set. So I mean, there you have it. There's two different ways to create a UEFI-enabled virtual machine in VMware Fusion, again, depending on the particular version you're running. As you could see in 8.5 and earlier, it's much more convoluted. You got to go in, create the VM, shut it down, go in and edit the VMX file in a text editor, add that additional line to say the firmware equals EFI, come back out, relaunch Fusion, go back in, and ta-da, there you are, you've got UEFI. But in version 10 and newer, they make it much easier. It's right there in the GUI. As soon as you create the new virtual machine, you're presented with the option to say BIOS or UEFI. And you even get the option for UEFI Secure Boot, which again really wasn't the topic of this video, but still, it's right there in the GUI. So thank you to VMware for putting that into the GUI and making it much, much simpler for those of us who are interested in doing a UEFI virtual machine in our home lab or on our Macs. So again, I thank you guys for stopping by, checking out the video. As always, be on the lookout for new content, and hope you enjoyed this one. Thanks so much.